Welcome to this afternoon's research seminar titled Sustaining a Legal Research Career from Dodgy IT to a Pandemic and Everything in Between. I'm going to be chairing this afternoon's session, and before I do so, can I just pay my respects to our Indigenous leaders, past, present and emerging, on whose virtual lands we're meeting both here in Canberra and in various parts of Australia, and perhaps outside of Australia, I definitely know. This afternoon, I'm joined by four of my esteemed colleagues, Peter Spender, Stephen Bottomley, Fiona Wheeler, and someone who appears on screen as Ned, but is in fact Tim Bonahady. I'm not going to introduce those four colleagues because I'm sure that they're all very well known to you in their illustrious and distinguished careers at the ANU and as legal scholars outlined in some considerable detail on our college website. The idea behind this afternoon's forum is really to generate a bit of a discussion between myself and my colleagues about the lessons learned across research careers that have spanned approximately 30 years or more, in terms of what has been learned from the ups and downs during those research careers, and what lessons from those times they think might be applicable to many of you who are struggling and facing significant research challenges during this pandemic, and as we look forward to possibly emerging from the constraints imposed upon us all by the pandemic, certainly in the ACT in coming weeks, but who knows in terms of the general outcome of the pandemic in terms of research and university constraints. It may well be a little while longer than that. What are the ways in which we might be able to learn from those lessons and possibly recover as we move forward with our careers? So with that sort of background, I'm going to ask a range of questions to my colleagues. We'll have about 3 rounds of questions, and then we'll move into a general Q&A period. So I'm going to start with you, Fiona, a general opening question to you. That is, setting aside the unprecedented challenges caused by the pandemic, can you initially share some thoughts on one of the biggest challenges that you faced in your research career and how you were able to overcome that?
Well, look, thank you, Don, and thank you to the organisers of this forum and for inviting me to participate. Don, I knew this question was coming, and I tried to think of a single moment or period of time in my research career that represented such a challenge. But ultimately, I think the greatest challenge that I faced was in fact a systemic one, this systemic challenge of finding the time and maintaining the energy over 30-odd years to produce quality outputs. And that's a reflection of the fact that ours are not 9-to-5 jobs, especially with teaching responsibilities and the ever increasing professionalisation of our teaching. That's something that's been particularly noticeable over the course of my career. So that's the challenge that I'd nominate. How did I wouldn't say overcome it. I think a better word is how I was able to navigate that challenge, because it was never a challenge that I was able to wholly surmount. But when I think about how I navigated that, 2 key things come to mind, 2 key strategies that I put in place. The first is ensuring, as best as I could, that I always researched issues that genuinely excited and enthused me. And that supplied the energy to sustain the effort, I suppose. And the second thing was harnessing the power of habit, which is a different thing from motivation. Harnessing the power of habit in terms of when and how I worked, because once I was able to develop habits about when and how I researched, I was just able to continue along that pathway, even when motivation, energy, other things were lacking. So that's my 2 or 3 minutes worth on that first question, a systemic rather than a single moment challenge.
Thanks, Fiona. So can I go to you, Peter, for your thoughts on that opening question?
Yeah, so mine is similar to Fiona's. It is systemic, and my particular take on it is that question about synergizing teaching, I think, because one of the things about teaching is that it's performative. So I think that one can invest a lot of time into that performance. And I don't think there's any problem with that. I think that's actually a good thing, because I think getting teaching right is really important because of the reputational effects of teaching, particularly the way that it reverberates through a relatively small community. So the idea is not to be perfectionist about it, but to recognise that it can and should be important to you. Research by comparison is a slow burn, of course, so you need to be clear about it being important, even though it doesn't present to you on a daily basis as being urgent, and that means that you often can procrastinate research activity. So, of course, you can make research performative by taking opportunities to present your research, but they're not as regular as teaching. Teaching is an exercise which is ongoing and to some extent unrelenting. And there's a lot of research activity, of course, that is you spend time alone, so it has a different effect. How I overcame that is, it's interesting, Fiona's reflections on that, because in some respects you don't necessarily overcome it, but you do develop strategies. For example, what I did was try to write a couple of books, which meant that I had to stay across the knowledge in my disciplines, which I then used effectively in my research. And they also allow you to leverage from the intellectual curiosity of your students, which I think is a remarkable resource. The other thing, of course, is that thing about, my sense about research is that it takes a village to raise a researcher. So finding your village and staying with that village is a good way that you can harness both, working out how to synergize between your teaching and your research, and to work out some of those performative elements of research. So there you go.
Thanks, Peter. So, Stephen, your thoughts on that opening question?
Thanks, John. Look, I think my big challenge, my first big challenge I ever encountered came about nearly a decade, I suppose, into my academic career, coinciding with my move to the ANU. And it was a big shift. I had to make a decision about my whole research direction. So for those first 8 or so years, I had been teaching commercial and corporate law, but I was researching in a completely different area, mental health law. That was fun and I enjoyed it, but the move to ANU really just sort of made me stop and think whether I could sustain that. It goes to Peter's point, I guess, about synergy. So there's a lot of energy I was expending in both staying on top of a very fast developing area of corporate law that I was teaching, and also then trying to maintain an interest in the mental health field. So I made the decision to put the mental health law research. Well, initially I just put it on a shelf that was in reach, and gradually across the years it moved off the shelf into a drawer and then the back end of a filing cabinet, and I don't know where it is now. So that was the first decision. The second decision was then, okay, having decided I was going to redirect my research effort into the corporate law area, is whereabouts. I mean, it's a vast field. It's also one that is very, very well trodden for the most part. I mean, did I want to become another person writing articles on, you know, the law and director's duties, or on you know, corporate takeovers or whatever? And I didn't want to do that. I didn't sort of see that that would sustain me or spark my interest to any great deal. This goes to Fiona's point about, you know, researching something that really excites you and interests you. So I had to sit back and think about what aspects of corporate law I wanted to do that would sustain my interest, but also not give me a sense that I was just treading in the footsteps of others. So that was, that took a couple of years really to sort itself out. It was associated, by the way, I should say, with another very, very practical challenge, because this was all around about the same time that desktop computers arrived on our desks, as they do. And suddenly we were faced with keyboards. And I quickly decided that if this was going to work, I was going to have to learn how to type rather than sitting there, you know, with just doing the two-finger stuff. So for about 3 months, I think, I'd stay back every night for an hour, and the law school had a program, a teach yourself to type program, which I borrowed, and eventually taught myself how to type. And I think that practical skill was one of the greatest things I've ever acquired in my academic life. I think it even beats learning how to use Wattle, actually. But that was a sort of a supportive challenge towards the bigger one of reorienting my research, my whole research direction.
Thanks, Stephen. So that's the first revelation today. Stephen was appointed as an academic at the ANU without knowing how to type. Tim, what are your reflections on that opening question?
Look, I guess I enjoy writing, and I haven't found it hard to do. I began trying to write books when I was still an undergraduate. Tried to write my first book. I think the thing I found most, the actual activity of writing is one I find really satisfying. The thing I think I've found most difficult has been around the reception of my work. I've been lucky that, you know, sometimes my books or articles or whatever have had very nice responses, but the whole kind of fear and trepidation and the mixture of, I guess, sometimes being praised, but also being hammered, or one might think unfairly criticised or ignored, or books being remaindered, sometimes being reprinted. I think they're the things which I have found, and I continue to find, difficult. And I guess if I think about how I've responded, and I don't think this is a good response, but when my work has succeeded by some kind of measure, it's often only kind of well after the fact that it gives me pleasure, whereas at the time when it might be doing well, I might still be too kind of nervous about it. But when it hasn't been well received, I've found that a pretty costly enterprise. And one can't do anything. I think that, well, it's just it goes with the territory. But I think that's the thing. But those things around reception of work, I still find. They can be inordinately satisfying, but also confronting.
Thanks, Tim. I must admit, I can certainly relate to those comments. So with those opening observations, I'm going to now probe a little bit deeper, because one of the dimensions that all of our four colleagues have had is that they've combined core academic pursuits of research and teaching within our college with a range of other wider activities. So trying to balance these additional activities across their careers has been an interesting dimension for all of them. So keeping with you, Tim, you've had a really remarkable multidisciplinary career, both within the ANU and beyond, including as a curator of exhibitions at the National Portrait Gallery of Australia and the National Library of Australia, amongst others. What were the challenges that you faced within the academy in balancing those various scholarly passions and being able to continue with your core legal scholarship?
I guess from my perspective on that has been, I think that sustaining oneself through a long period of writing is difficult, to keep on doing it. And I think that universities should be grateful and really satisfied if their staff keep on doing interesting things. And I think universities should be less worried about the field in which they do them. So if there are some academics who want to write beyond the field in which they might be teaching, I think universities should embrace that as this is what an intellectual might want to do. And I've found the diversity of what I've done really satisfying, and through very significant parts of my time at the ANU, I've had deans or directors or whatever who have been hugely supportive of what I've done, and I've had many opportunities, and I've had some who have been less supportive. And I guess I think I was fortunate, partly in terms of the timing in which I did things, so the university might have been better funded and more able to cope with someone like me. Then I think it would be much harder for a younger academic to risk the I guess what I've done. I would still encourage anyone who, it fits with what Fiona and Peter at least have said about it. It's really important that you write about things which you really are passionate about and you want to know about. And if they fall outside the law, or if they only partially intersect with the law, I would encourage others to do so, because you do your best work when you really want to do it. And also, I think it may end up making you a more interesting and also possibly a more productive thinker and writer.
Thanks, Tim. So coming to you, Stephen, you've served, of course, within multiple senior leadership roles in the college, including as our most recent dean. How were you able to maintain a research profile juggling those various senior leadership roles, and then more particularly pick that up once you step down from those positions? And I know you've been very productive in the last year or so.
I think that the short answer is I don't think I was able to do it very well at all. Certainly during the course of the deanship, my research really just ended up being pushed literally to a very small table in the corner of my room. I simply couldn't devise a strategy to maintain any research momentum, despite the best efforts of working with Wendy, and before her Bea, and before her Karen, to sort of, we'd set aside a day a week, block out a day a week, the Dean's Research Day, whereupon the Vice-Chancellor would announce that there was going to be a strategic planning day somewhere out in the back blocks of New South Wales. So there went that. So I quickly just decided not to keep punishing myself trying to do it. And I just gathered lots and lots of articles and books and things for for future reference when I could get back. It's not to say I was completely inert. I mean, a good thing I was trying to do is, there were always new editions of textbooks that needed to be done, and that was a relatively straightforward way of keeping things ticking over. And also short seminar papers, short conference papers of that type, where you can just sort of briefly explore an idea and note that that's something I could then develop later on into perhaps something bigger. And then, so when it all finished, when I stepped down from the dean and took some leave, my biggest worry was whether or not I just completely lost my mojo. I'd sort of got so used to thinking, reading only short memos and emails, getting impatient if anything lasted for more than a page without getting to the point, that sort of thing. Would I be able to sustain reading a full article, let alone a book? I really just gave myself some time out and not to worry about it. And found one day I walked into my study here and picked up a book that I'd put aside and opened it up and sat down and started reading. So that was my brain's way of telling me that, the band was back and we could start playing music again. So it took off from there. But so I mean, that's a very personal story. But I think part of what I want to say is that there will always be times in our academic lives where we just simply don't, either by external circumstance or by internal motivation, the research stuff just isn't coming. And my advice there would be just don't beat yourself up about that. Give yourself some time out. It does not have to be a 24/7, 12 months of the year thing. We need time out from all things.
Thanks, Stephen. That's some really helpful advice. So coming to you, Peter, you also served in very senior leadership roles in the college, but you also served and continue to play a role in the ACT Civil and Administrative Tribunal. How were you able to maintain a balance between those roles and continue your research agenda?
Yeah. So I actually find that they're highly complementary for various reasons. It might be that people don't know ACAT very well and they tend to think of it as a small claims tribunal. It's in fact got a jurisdiction that's extremely wide. It's probably has the widest jurisdiction of any court or tribunal in Australia in a lot of ways. I mean, the areas, I've worked in a wide range of areas, but currently my areas are mental health, some sort of appeals, disciplinary matters, and I'm developing an expertise in what I call a range of claims involving speech acts, so defamation, vilification, discrimination, those areas. The reason I think they're complementary is because I love legal reasoning. I've always been candid about that. I love legal reasoning and I love working with doctrine. But I also love legal problem solving, and when you add in the people, it makes it very exciting in my view. So, but the other thing about research is that you're moving across legal categories a lot, and so you understand the logic that underpins various, particularly law disciplines. So for example, you understand the difference between the logic that underpins public and private law, but you also learn a lot more besides. You learn about the law in action, you learn about evidence, proof, things like decision-making, institutional design. So you learn a lot of what appears to be contextual information, but is very, very important in terms of your understanding. So, for example, the work that I do regularly involves mental health hearings, and those hearings, I preside in those hearings, and they concern the treatment of people with very, very serious mental illness. So those hearings are challenging and complex, but they're also very rewarding because their focus is therapeutic, and we're dealing, of course, with very vulnerable people. So it presents a lot of opportunities to explore important things, but in a context that really matters. So the other times I find it's surprising sometimes the knowledge that you get that feeds both ways. So I try to be a regular attender of the seminars at ANU. In fact, I'm a bit of course, a webinar junkie. I watch webinars as much as possible. The ones, of course, at ANU are wonderful, and the complementary nature of the knowledge is remarkable. For example, Yelena put on a seminar just recently in the Law and Philosophy series about legal reasoning by Michael Ferran. Now, that had a direct effect for me because I was writing a decision where I was contemplating some of those questions about legal reasoning. So even though ostensibly it's about law and philosophy, it had a direct effect on a project that I was working on. So what that demonstrates to me is continue to intellectually explore, because you can't imagine how even though you think you have a command of an area, there's always so much to learn, and you'll always find points of an incredible interest. So to me, it's been very valuable for all sorts of reasons of intersection, I suppose.
Thanks, Peter, for those thoughts. So finally, in this round of questions to you, Fiona, you've also served, like Peter and Stephen, in multiple college and ANU leadership roles, including as chair of the academic board. How did you go about trying to maintain your research profile during those years as you juggled those various senior roles? And I'm very mindful that a lot of your research has had a very strong focus on archival research, and so that requires a lot of discipline and focus. So how were you able to maintain that during that particular period?
Well, echoing Stephen to some extent, it wasn't easy, and there were times when I had to temporarily put my research aside. But there were, I suppose, there were three things I'd mention in terms of being able to keep my research career ticking over in those years. Oddly enough, one of the first things was the fact that I had pivoted at the time I began to take on senior leadership roles at ANU. That was the time when I had, in large part, executed my pivot towards archival research, which was very much my passion. And I was fortunate enough to secure an honorary Harold White Fellowship at the National Library, which allowed me to spend 6 months at the National Library as an insider, assembling what turned out to be a large body of primary material that I was able to subsequently draw upon. So I moved into the senior leadership roles at ANU with that research capital behind me, that body of primary material that I could then draw on. The second thing was again, much like Stephen, I reconciled myself to the fact that there would necessarily be ebbs and flows in the intensity of my research career. And so it was important for me to focus on the big picture of my work calendar. So in terms of securing time for research, to look ahead to teaching-free periods, to times of OSP, to periods of block teaching, to the summer when there are usually fewer major meetings. So I remember one summer when ANU decided to reaccredit all of its undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, which as chair of ANU Academic Board kept me very, very busy. But nonetheless, once looking at the big picture, I could see that there were pockets of time over the course of a year that I could harness towards my research objectives. And the third thing is that I have always been fortunate to have wonderful, wonderful colleagues. And I need to, look, there are so many people that deserve a shout out here, but I, as he's on the panel, I want to mention Stephen, who at a number of critical points in the time when I was, associate dean and also on academic board, when he knew I had a major presentation upcoming or a major research deadline, I think there were at least 2 occasions when he said, look, why don't you lie low for a few days, and if there are any bushfires, just bat them to me. And I'm very, very grateful for that, Stephen, because they were bodies of time that I was able to use really, really productively. And so collegiality is in so many ways, and this is just one example, immensely important to sustaining and building a research career.
Thanks, Fiona. So I'm just going to ask our colleagues for some final reflections in terms of really sort of lessons learned from all of that experience in terms of applying that in the context of a pandemic. And whilst all of our colleagues are very esteemed and very experienced, I don't think many of them are around during the Spanish-American flu, so they can't have direct experience of the last big global pandemic. And once we've heard from all of them, I'll throw it open to questions, so please prepare yourself for any questions. So staying with you, Fiona, what are your thoughts then in terms of sustaining a research career with the inevitable highs and lows and being able to deal with those challenges in the context of the situation that many of our colleagues within the college are facing at the moment as they try to sustain research and teaching, but also the challenges created by the pandemic?
Well, look, three tips, and I'll keep it brief because we can, if people find these helpful, we can talk about them in the Q&A. But and this really just brings together what I've been saying earlier. Tip number 1: ensure you do what you love. So passion is terribly important. 2, embrace the power of habit. I haven't really been able to elaborate upon that, but that's been very, very important for me throughout my career. And the 3rd piece of advice is to run your own race. Run your own race, and remember that no 2 academics and no 2 academic careers are the same. And I think the disruption of COVID and the inevitable ongoing disruptions of adjusting to the new COVID normal and whatever happens after that, in the context of those disruptions, it's very important to continue to run your own race because our careers and our career trajectories are all different. I mean, scan the horizon, keep an eye on what people are doing, but run your own race.
Thanks, Fiona. Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I took this question to be from adversity comes opportunity, really, because this is such an unprecedented challenge. There's nothing that's occurred ever like this in any of our lives. This is so remarkable. So what I wanted to think about was what was going to be positive from it. Now, the first thing I think that's positive is that it's terrible, the exodus that's occurred from the university, but that just means that there's more scope, there's more space for the remaining scholars, and that means that you're more likely to be able to carve out a space that's your own, and that's an important quality, because what's happening now with COVID is that people are embracing the seriously big questions in a way that to me, again, is unprecedented. We're really seriously thinking about questions like individual and collective responsibility. We're thinking about inequality. And COVID has presented this incredibly urgent agar plate so that people are now looking at these questions very seriously. So that means that people will listen now. So to me, that's again an opportunity. I think there's more opportunity to do interdisciplinary research. It's happened in the past. I've done it in the past in relation to my work on women in corporations. I've linked up with women, particularly women who've done research in corporate governance. But there's lots of opportunities for law scholars in the midst of these big dilemmas that we're facing. So the other thing is to that need to, we've got greater access now to the giants. We can actually zoom into these international fora much more easily. And that involves quite a bit of opportunities for informal linking and self-promotion. That's hard for some people to do, but what I can say about that, I think, is take the ANU brand with you. When you're doing that exercise, ANU is a well-respected brand. Do it as an ANU colleague and take that opportunity to extend. So I think it's an unprecedented change, but in some respects, it's a variation on what we've done in the past. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And look, I can certainly say that one of the unexpected benefits for me during the pandemic is that I've acquired a new friend called Dell, who I meet at virtually 8 o'clock every morning. And so that's been a new friendship for me. Stephen, your thoughts on that question?
My thoughts on Dell are a bit more jaundiced than yours, Don. The battles I've been having with my laptop, but set that aside. Peter's picked up a few, some comments I would have made about, seeking benefit in adversity. So let me offer some more general comments, because the question really, was, lessons learned from sustaining a research career. Very early on, we had a visiting academic. I can't remember their name, but it was a session like this talking about our research. This was an American academic, and so some of what they said it needed to be adjusted for the Australian condition. But their advice was, and what I now call the rule of threes, which was to always have on the go at different stages of development 3 bits of work. So there's something that is in that very early stage. It's notes and jottings, it's ideas buzzing around your head, it's the stuff you mull over while you're loading the dishwasher or whatever. Or you go to a seminar, as Peter suggested, and somebody says something, you write that down. So it's something that's in the very sort of embryonic stage. Then you've got the second piece, which is well into draft stage. You're writing this piece. This is the piece you're currently working on. If you're like me, you won't know how far. I can never tell how far I am into a piece. Somebody will say, "How long have you got to go on it?" And I say, "I would not have a clue. It'll take as long as it takes." But it's a piece that is my current piece of work. And then the third piece is something that's at the end of that process. It's near due for submission, or perhaps it has been submitted and you're getting referees' comments, so it's at the end of the process. So there's always something. You've got 3 things going on at different stages of the process. The advantage of that is, if you're like me and you get bored with working on one of those things, or you get smitten by doubt about whether it's ever going to go anywhere, or you just get frustrated by it, you can flip to one of the other things and pay your attention to that. And they don't have to all be separate things. They could all be part of a larger project, but equally they could all be quite separate little projects. And I guess the last thing I'd say about it is I break that rule as much as I observe it. So aiming for it, I've often found to be a helpful thing. There's always just sort of one of 3 things I can be in a position to draw down on and use. If I'm asked to give a seminar presentation, or if somebody says tell us what you're working on, there's always an answer that I can give.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'll go to you, Tim, and then we'll go to questions.
I'll be very brief, I guess, and I'll be a bit sort of pragmatic, like Stephen has just been. I think the keys are still to write early, to write often, to print out your work. If you're of a younger generation than I am, I know many of you do work purely on the screen, but I think that you should try printing out and annotating. At the moment, some of my family are working very late in the night, and I have sort of ended up getting much earlier than I ever have before, and I have a couple of hours. We asked them to have the house to myself. and I'm writing something which has got 22 short chapters, and every morning I print out one or two of them, get 3,000 or 4,000 words, and I work through them. It can be, as it was this morning, a pretty confronting start to the day when you're printing out something where you think you've been making good progress and you think sort of, oh shit, it really isn't looking all that good. But it can, you can sometimes find yourself ahead of where you think you are. But having that kind of routine and just keep on confronting your work and working through it, that's what I do.
Thanks, Tim, so much. So look, I'm now going to turn it over to questions. We've tried to give you a bit of a sense in terms of a research trajectory, a research career, trying to deal with ups and downs, and trying to address some of the challenges that we're all facing at the moment, but hopefully that we can learn from that in terms of coming out to the other side. So I'm just going to use the raise hand function and turn it over to you for questions. So first of all, Viv.
Thank you very much, everyone. I found this really interesting and helpful. But Don, I'm wondering if you would summarise some of your tips, because you're also an esteemed professor with a long research career, and you no doubt have your own take on this.
Thanks, Viv. I guess what's pretty much sustained me is enthusiasm and interest and energy, picking up on some of the themes that Fiona and Peter certainly raised. That certainly kept me sustained, and often my research agenda for the day is dictated by the 7 o'clock ABC News Bulletin in terms of getting me to think about issues. And I would also like to acknowledge a theme that Fiona raised, and that is Stephen's support, that whilst I was Deputy Dean, I would take time off for my research, and that was incredibly important for me. So that those are all been key factors for me. Thanks for the question. Damien.
Yeah, thanks, Don, and thanks everyone for the insights. I suppose my question relates to the value of co-authoring and what the panelists think of that, because I found that a very pragmatic and useful way of producing content without, I suppose, having the same, for the want of a better word, burden in terms of having to, really take on a project myself. Now, obviously, I have those projects as well, but often a way that I found of continuing to produce content was by collaborating with others, often more senior colleagues. So I was wondering about the panelists' reflections on that, and potentially maybe some discussion of the balance between the value of solo-authored works versus, the possibility of collaborating and getting some perhaps lower-hanging fruit, because many hands make short work type thing. So I suppose some reflections on that I'd find interesting.
So Stephen, if you don't mind, I might go to you as someone who's chaired many appointments and promotions committees. Any particular institutional insights, I guess, on that question?
I've often sensed that there's a sort of a folklore out there that sole-authored pieces are what counts, and there's a sort of a discount applied to co-authored pieces. It's not actually been my actual experience. It's the assumptions often been brought into the process, but it's not the way the process has worked out. Of course, I mean, it always helps to if there is multiple authorship on a piece, that it's the nature of the contribution is understood. And I'm sitting here, and the way my screen is set up, just there is one of my co-authors with in Peter Spender. Peter and I have written on numerous occasions. So for me, Damien, the choice is really just determined by the nature of the work that's got to be done. Sometimes a piece just lends itself to being co-authored, as you say. There'll be aspects of a project that I just know nothing about, and I know full well that somebody like Peter or somebody else, this is their domain, so we'll have a chat and we work it out from there. Other times it's just it's a piece that not even I'm sure I fully understand, therefore I wouldn't want to inflict it upon anybody else, and so I soldier on with it myself. So, I mean, I don't know that I don't have any hard rules about this. It sort of seems to be very much a sort of a evolutionary thing. But to go back, to go back to Don's question, I don't think we should get too hung up about, whether or not co-authored pieces, are they going to have a effect on promotion chances or on appointment chances? Certainly, I've not experienced that in my time on those panels.
Peter, Fiona or Tim, any thoughts on that? Jump in.
Well, look, I would, just to round out Stephen's comments, certainly when I was sitting on those committees and looking at a CV, I always, ideally, so I said everyone runs their own race, but where there was a mix of sole and co-authored work, I thought that was a very good thing. I think, obviously, I don't need to speak to sole-authored work, but co-authored work to me also was a demonstration both of how someone was connecting with the academic community, their network of scholarly contacts, and their capacity to work with other people. So if there was no co-authored work in somebody's research profile, that, were I sitting on a committee, I might ask myself, the question, well, how well networked, connected is this person? Are they reaching out to the scholars in their field in other institutions and so forth? And they might very well be doing that in other ways. So, yes, that's all I want to add. I don't know whether Tim or Peter have anything further.
Any further questions from anyone? I know some colleagues have had to leave us. Niven.
So, excuse me if I sideline my question apart from the topic, because I'm probably the youngest person on this panel, and I've got a question I wanted to ask in relation to all members on the panel. Looking back at your career, and what advice would you give your younger self in terms of navigating your interests towards a career in law, a legal research career in law?
Okay, big picture question there.
I'm sorry,
Tim.
It's too vague, but I just found it the right time if I could ask this question.
Of course, that's fine. Tim, any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think I have a policy of, that regrets are pointless. So there's a certain way in which one can revisit one's younger self and what one might have done, but there's also a sense in which one just has to live with the choices that I or we all make. So I don't know if I can offer you any guidance.
Okay, Peter.
Yes, so look, I think that you can sometimes be a bit impatient about how you're progressing, and I think it's important, as Stephen, Fiona have both said, and Tim, that you've got to recognise that there'll be ebbs and flows, and that you've got to think about ways in which you navigate around those ebbs and flows. I think that there's some very important questions in research about curiosity-led research, which is what we've been predominantly focusing upon in this panel, and the reality of, for example, grant acquisition. I think you have to be sometimes strategic about your research, which means you're not necessarily going to be doing the research that you fully love. So the question is how you negotiate the love with the grind. The other thing I think that hasn't been said, but it's something that came to me immediately when I thought about the challenges, was the challenge associated with the other parts of your life, and particularly the caring challenges that you have. One of the things I completely underestimated, I think, when I went into my career was that I probably underestimated my caring responsibilities. And those caring responsibilities, of course, go across your life. I thought about the time that I had to spend with children, but I didn't think about the care that I had to provide as I progressed through my career. And we've all got those caring responsibilities. My sense is that that is well understood by promotions committees and appointments committees. And there's the processes for that now are very, very effective in my view. It's a bit more tricky, though, the way that you present to the world. So, for example, if you've had a career that's almost entirely part-time, you still present as a full-time scholar to the world. So there's things about it that are still there's some structural things that flow from the caring responsibility. So those are the things that you have to think about. But yeah, that's my 2 cents worth.
Can I just wrap up with a final question that I'm going to throw out to my colleagues, and that is, what are your thoughts on a COVID pivot? You sort of tossed around this idea about pivotal moments that occur in the law or in our society. Obviously, for me as an international lawyer, 9/11 was a pivotal moment. All of us can remember the dismissal quite clearly, a pivotal moment for constitutional lawyers, and our great colleague Michael Coper in particular. Is COVID one of those pivotal moments where you pivot your research and then, if you have the capacity, focus on COVID-related issues? Any thoughts on that?
Can I jump in on that, Don? Because I've been thinking about this a bit. Because corporate law is full of pivotal or seemingly pivotal moments, and some of them disappear almost as quickly as they appear, and some hang on. And my advice to somebody starting out in a research career would be not to get too hung up on pivots, actually. To do the research in areas that are of interest to you. And if that then happens to be able to be tagged onto a current development, a current issue, then all the better. And of course, Don, as you've said, there are some areas of law which are more likely than others to be able to do just that. The work that you do, for example, seems to be very able to bring in current developments and what's happening in the moment. There are other areas of law which won't be that way, and I just don't think we should get too concerned about always having to chase the latest thing. I mean, to me, it'd be more interesting to try to predict what is coming over the horizon than what's already knocking on the front door. I just mixed a metaphor there, but you get the idea. I think our value as researchers is to see it before it's turned up, as well as being able to say something useful about it once it has arrived.
Okay, Tim, any thoughts on that?
Look, I included the pandemic when I taught environmental law last year. I've been meaning to there'd been really interesting literature around pandemics by Mike Davis and other guys. If I was teaching, I would, definitely be continuing to do that. And I know that in my current writing, I've managed to incorporate the Spanish flu, where at one point I would never have thought to, and it turns out to be really interesting in terms of what I'm writing. So, if one can be responsive, I think, if it fits what one's doing, then of course one should be doing it.
Great. Fiona or Peter, any final thoughts on that question?
Yeah, look, I agree with Steve that in some respects there are very significant opportunities now to be thinking about how this pandemic informs your research. But often this is definitely a pivot that is a pivot like no others and will be considered as such. But sometimes as Steve said, we've thought that things were pivotal that turned out less to be so. So continuing along your own, thinking about building your own research trajectory and then thinking about how the pandemic might inform that in particular ways, I think is a preferable way to proceed.
Good. Last word to you, Fiona.
Well, I was going to say something very similar to Steve and Peter. What I'll add is that sometimes the current momentous event, be it anything from the dismissal to the pandemic, can actually hide other things that are happening at the time. And I think it can be very interesting to look beneath, around, what else is happening at the moment that is exciting and I might want to learn more about and explore. And that's something I've always done in my career. I've actually always shied away from the big shiny thing of the moment and looked to see what else was out there. And that sort of approach has actually put me in very good stead. Yeah.
Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for participating, joining in, engaging in the questions. And can I especially extend my thanks to Peter, Stephen, Tim and Fiona for sharing their words of wisdom on this very important and engaging topic. And have fun researching, everyone. Bye.